On December 28, 1836, just days after London had celebrated Christmas, a man walking along Edgware Road noticed a sack propped up against a slab of stone. Instinctually wary, he fetched a constable. And when the two of them opened the sack, they were met with an unexpected horror: the headless, limbless torso of a woman. Welcome to Victorian True Crime, a series dedicated to the sensational criminal cases that defined a culture obsessed with civility, sin, and spectacle. The torso found on Edgware Road was immediately taken in for further examination. But with no distinguishing characteristics, the identity of the victim could not be determined. Then, a little over a week later, on January 6, 1837, men working at Johnson's Lock at the Regent Canal discovered that the lock gate would not close. Attempting to dislodge the obstruction that was blocking the gate, they grabbed a fishing pole and began fishing around the water. And out of the canal, they pulled a human head. The head of a woman with long, dark hair. Though her features were unrecognizable, it was clear that she had suffered severe wounds to her left eye and lower jaw, the latter of which was so dislocated that it was protruding from the skin. The head was quickly determined to belong to the torso that had been discovered days earlier, and it was put on display at the police station in hopes that it would be recognized. When no one came forward to identify the victim, the head was placed in preserving spirits, and authorities could do little but wait. The set would be completed on February 2nd, when a sack hidden in some bushes along Cold Harbor Lane was opened to reveal a pair of human legs. With the crude untidiness of the knife work, it was not difficult to match the limbs to the rest of the dismembered corpse. By this time, every paper in London was running reports of the gruesome findings and speculating as to the identity of the dismembered woman. In March, a man named William Gay turned up at the police station. Mr. Gay had been searching for his sister, who, according to reports, had last been seen by friends on Christmas Eve 3 months earlier. So let's rewind to December 24th, 1836, and meet Hannah Brown. Hannah Brown was a 35-year-old widow who was working as a laundress. Hannah was described by those who knew her as a hardworking, financially independent woman of good sense and character, who abstained from alcohol and took very good care of herself. That Christmas Eve, Hannah Brown had more reason to celebrate than usual. Her fiancé, James Greenacre, had recently proposed, and the two were set to tie the knot at a Christmas wedding ceremony the following day. Though a bit older than Hannah at the age of 50, James Greenacre was a good catch. A prosperous grocer with gentlemanly manners and a 1,000-acre farm in America. In fact, Hannah had spent the last month selling off her property and possessions in anticipation of the big move that was going to happen after the wedding. The couple planned to set sail across the Atlantic, where Hannah would live out her happily ever after with James on his large farm in America. According to the testimony of her landlords and friends, John and Elizabeth Corney, that afternoon of December 24th, 1836, James hired a hansom cab to collect his bride and most of her possessions. Hannah, dressed in her very best, said goodbye to her friend Elizabeth and stepped into the carriage, promising to return the key to her room once she had collected the last of her things. She had been missing ever since. All the pieces of this grim jigsaw puzzle fell into place when William Gay looked upon the preserved head and definitively identified his sister, Hannah Brown. Police immediately issued a warrant for the arrest of James Greenacre on suspicion of murder. They at once descended on his home in Lambeth. And not a day too soon, as it turned out. In fact, they found him packed and ready to leave for America on the very next morning. Nor was he alone when they found him. Oh no, he was living with a young woman named Sarah Gale and her 4-year-old son. Turns out old James already had a family. Though not officially married, Sarah and James had been living together as common law man and wife for quite some time. Sarah was also found in possession of and even wearing several of Hannah Brown's things, including a gold watch and some of Hannah's jewelry. Even more incriminating was the discovery of a saw and knife in the couple's house, which were determined to match the wounds found on the head and torso. Now, I've said it before, and I will say it again. The Victorians were the OG true crime enthusiasts. And the people of London, many of whom had been following this macabre case for months, were practically salivating at this point. The trial that followed was pure Victorian theater. Sold-out galleries, souvenir engravings, lurid pamphlets, and sensationalist penny dreadfuls circulating like mad. The prosecution argued that Greenacre's offer of marriage had always been a scam, that he had never intended to marry Hannah Brown. As it turned out, James had no property in America. In fact, he had no property or money of his own at all. They argued that the whole affair was a premeditated murder scheme with no other purpose than to obtain Hannah Brown's money. James eventually confessed to killing Hannah, although he insisted it was an accident. He claimed that on the eve of their Christmas wedding, an argument had ensued after both he and Hannah realized that the other wasn't as wealthy as the other had supposed. According to James's own confession, Hannah had then become disagreeable, and he had accidentally hit her with a wooden plank he happened to be holding, after which she accidentally fell back and hit her head on a chair. It was all a tragic accident. Well, 3 doctors would say that the body told a different story, but whatever. James confessed that in a panic, he dismembered Hannah's body with a carving knife, packed the pieces into various sacks, and distributed them all over London, like grotesque holiday parcels. Throughout the proceedings, he insisted on Sarah Gale's innocence, that she had played no part in the murder, and that she had been entirely ignorant of the fact that her new clothes and jewelry had belonged to Hannah Brown. It took the jury only 15 minutes to declare James Greenacre guilty of willful murder and Sarah Gale guilty of accomplice to murder. Both were convicted, he to hang, she to transportation for life in New South Wales, along with her son. James Greenacre was hanged at Newgate Prison on May 2nd, 1837, before a jeering crowd. When the hangman pulled the lever, the spectators cheered. His death mask can still be seen today at the Crime Museum at New Scotland Yard. His story would be retold for decades, his character recast in the Victorian imagination as the quintessential modern monster. A gentleman by appearance, a predator and killer of women, a city that made a spectacle of both. Because in Victorian London, horror wasn't hidden in the dark. It was sold by the candle, printed by the inch.